Welcome back. We've come to the end of today's edition of News and Views, but we're going to be wrapping up with a really, really wonderful conversation that was had last night on hashtag Wednesday Nights with Inayat Wadi. Israel's Knesset. The Knesset is the Israeli parliament, in short. That's basically what it is. They've essentially passed down a law making execution the default sentence for certain cases involving Palestinians. And there was a lot of conversation around that law and how it is seemingly targeting Palestinians. It's one of the ways that the Israeli regime essentially wants to use to continue to oppress, to continue to exterminate and eliminate Palestinians. And there was a really wonderful panel discussion where this was unpacked impeccably, its implications, why it was passed by the Knesset, and the implications it will have. And that panel included Dr. Ramzy Baroud, Professor Jeff Halper, and Dr. Yvonne Ridley. It was anchored by none other than Inayat Wadi. And if you missed it last night, oh my. But we have a snippet for you. And you can head over to our social media pages to take a look, to take a listen, follow us on our various pages, Spotify being one of them, and you'll be able to hear the full conversation. Otherwise, from myself, Salah, and the rest of the team, enjoy your long weekend. We'll be back with you again next week. Take a listen to this brilliant conversation.
Well, look, I agree with Ramzy completely. There's a missing element in all of this, and that is the framework. The conceptual framework. If you go to a doctor with a pain in your chest, you can explain what's happening, but it could be a heart attack, and it could be you ate something bad for dinner. So the medicine, the analysis, how do you resolve this has to do with the diagnosis. If you don't have that, you have no idea. You can describe what's happening. Israelis are committing genocide against Palestinians. Land is being taken. It's unjust, all that stuff. But you're not naming the thing, the system. You don't have that conceptual understanding that then leads you to understand the logic of it. There's a logic. There's a structure. There's a process of what's going on. And that is settler colonialism. Now, I know we use the term all the time, settler colonialism, but we don't use it as an analytical device. We use it as an accusation. We say, Zionism is settler colonialism. Okay, good. We've said that. Now let's get on. But no, you can't do that. You've got to take settler colonialism seriously. It's a really meaningful concept that has within it the analysis, the diagnosis that you need in order to understand what's happening. And from that flows the resolution. Instead, we usually use the word conflict, which is exactly the opposite of settler colonialism, because settler colonialism is unilateral. There aren't two sides. There aren't Jews and Arabs. Like there is a conflict sets up a false symmetry. There's two sides. Now the question is, how do we get one side to deal with the other side? How do we make it symmetrical? How do we get justice? How do we negotiate? But none of that is a part of the Zionist agenda because it's a settler colonial agenda. It doesn't want to negotiate. It doesn't recognize another side. It doesn't in any way see any political resolution. Settler colonialism has its, and Zionism is very clear about it, has its end game, which is to Judaize Palestine, to turn an Arab country of Palestine into a Jewish country, displace the Palestinians that Zionism doesn't even see it as Palestinians, as the Arabs in a generic way. Displace these people, they can go anywhere else. You often hear there's 22 Arab states, let them go there, they're Arabs. Take their land and replace them with Jews, and then do a cultural and maybe even physical genocide if necessary. Any price is okay. And then you Judaize the country and it's ours, and then you normalize. And normalization is the end game, and we're getting very close to that, with the Abraham Accords and all of that. And I think this whole issue today, I think we're in the pacification stage, breaking all the resistance to Zionism, and that explains Gaza. It explains the West Bank. It explains Iran. It explains Hezbollah. And once you get pacification, a kind of industrial quiet, then you can go on to normalization. So I think what we have to begin to do is really take settler colonialism as a serious concept. That's the analysis, and to really push it into all our discussions. Very, very seldom do I ever see an article or hear a discussion that really unpacks what settler colonialism means. But if you get it, if you understand that process and the logic behind it and where it's going, then you're able to deal with it, right? And so I think, if you're talking about the death penalty, this new law, the death penalty for terrorists law that was just passed the other day, well, it makes sense because it's a part of the pacification campaign. You kill anyone who is resisting. And that's a precondition to normalization. You can't normalize as long as there's resistance. So every little piece, whether it's a big thing like the genocide in Gaza, or a smaller detail like legislation in the Knesset for a death penalty, it all fits in. And you begin to see the big picture and understand what's going on, but only if you stop talking about conflict and sides, and you begin to talk about a unilateral settler colonial process of Judaizing Palestine. Once we begin to understand that, once that becomes the basis of our discussions, then I think we're able to really, in a very productive kind of a way, begin to think about resolutions, which is decolonization, and strategies. So that, I think, is really the big missing piece in all our discussion.
Thank you for that, Prof. Dr. Yvonne Ridley. I think just following up from what Prof. Jeff has been talking about in the settler colonial project, but it does appear that it is getting more extreme in every way. And one of the reasons for this is, has the world truly woken up to the dark reality or the harsh reality of what the settler colonial project is all about and what it intends to do? And this is the reason why we see extreme measures. We see a Western world for a very long time talking about capital punishment, talking about death penalties. And here we have this legislation that specifically, again, taking us back into the ages where it speaks about hanging, death by hanging as well. And, has the world woken up to the reality of what Prof has been saying as well, as to what the greater the greater plan or the greater agenda behind the settler colonial project lies?
No, the world hasn't woken up. We have known about this death penalty for some weeks, if not months now, and we've sat back and done absolutely nothing about it until it's happened. And now we have people grabbing their pearls and being really upset and saying, oh, we can't have this, it's got to stop. This should have been knocked on the head before it even got off the legislation process. The bill, which applies to Palestinians convicted of terror charges, but not to Jewish extremists, has to be repealed, and it has to be done as a matter of urgency. And, I despair at the Palestinians. They must be looking at us along with the rest of the global South, saying more words, more hot air. How many more of our people will have to be killed before it eventually is repealed, if it ever is? I would question the morality of state-sponsored killing. I've never been for the death penalty. I think capital punishment in this case is just another inventive way of killing Palestinians. And no doubt the Israelis will turn it into a spectator sport. These are the people who moved their sofas and settees over to the hills looking down on Gaza so they could watch the destruction of Gaza. They're probably queuing now for the first tickets to watch the first execution and turn it into a spectacle. They're an absolutely disgusting race of people. They have been fully exposed by the war in Gaza. These are the people who bomb schools, bomb hospitals, bomb clinics, who sodomize doctors to death and then go on TV in Tel Aviv and are treated like heroes. Their ministers have been protesting for the right to rape as an act of self-defense. You can't make it up. These are savages, and we should not be surprised that they've come up with another inventive way of humiliating the Palestinians. It's time that we know the two-state solution is dead, although politicians will still insult us with weaselly words about two-state this, two-state that. I say, axe the two-state solution. It's dead now. It's dead in the water. Let's have one state, one Palestine, one solution. It worked before and it can work again. And instead of battling and getting sucked down in bits and pieces of legislation, which is all this is designed to do, let's really take a sledgehammer to crack a nut on this and stop all this savagery from this evil, brutal, depraved nation.
Certainly, Dr. Yvonne.
I'm having a rant, but I am just really, I'm ashamed sitting here looking at Ramzy from Gaza, and he must be sitting there thinking, oh God, we've heard it all before. All these Westerners who trot out the same crap. Well, we have to do something. We can't just keep coming on to, as panelists, to these shows, which is great that you're talking about it, because we're not talking about it in Britain, as you would expect. And I would imagine they're not talking about it in America either. But to watch the likes of Ben Gavir opening bottles of champagne to celebrate the extinguishing of a life. These are a people with no values. And I'm sick and tired of seeing our Prime Minister, who's bought and paid for by the Israeli lobby, standing there saying, we have shared values. Do we? Hell, we have no shared values with these people. They're monstrous, absolutely monstrous. And we really have to do something to, as I say, this legislation, they're just tormenting us. They're just waving, today we're going to kill the Palestinians. Then there'll be, should we hang them? Should we use a sword? Should we poison them? Let's have a referendum about it. And they'll turn it into a whole spectacle of entertainment, because that's the people that they are. They are savages.
I don't like this discussion, Yvonne. I don't accept it. I don't like that language. And if that's an analysis, that these are just a bunch of bad people, and that's the problem, then that's not an analysis. You can't, you come from the British Empire. You guys killed millions and millions of people. Are you savages?
So if anyone knows what
no, that's not the problem. The problem is settler colonialism. It has to do with ideologies. It makes people do things. There are bad people, but to boil the whole thing down to these are a bunch of savages, that's what you call an analysis? That's completely deflecting attention from anything political, from anything ideological, from anything historical, and reducing it all to a bunch of bad people. And I won't even participate in this discussion if that's going to be the level of the discussion.
Because you don't like the truth. 1 million of us marched in London because we know
anything. What does that help? We put Ben Gvir in jail, and that's
Prof. And Yvonne, can I just jump into this discussion? I think, Ramzy, the key issue here is, there's just so much history, spanning well over 7 decades. And there's just so much that one can actually unpack in terms of the justice system or the injustice system within which this Zionist entity operates. I mean, if one takes, for example, when one looks at just the conviction rate until now, it's based largely on confessions, on forced confessions that have been extracted under duress, torture during interrogations. There's been something like a 96% conviction rate until now. And just to understand what this piece of legislation will be doing in terms of providing, a license to kill people off, a license. And Dr. Yvonne makes a point here with regard to, again, one of the most critical questions that one needs to ask as well is, will the Palestinians ever receive justice when one is talking about a system that operates separately for Israelis, for example, under civil courts or civil jurisdiction, and you have military courts that are operating exclusively for Palestinians?
Right. So the answer is no. Palestinians will never receive justice if this justice is being imparted by the Israeli government or even Israeli society. Vast majority of Israelis, were very supportive of the savagery, indeed, of the Gaza genocide. And I don't think there's a contradiction, by the way, between what both of the speakers have said. If the term savage doesn't apply here, I don't know where else it applies. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we do not establish academic or intellectual frameworks that will help us to understand the sources of this savagery. So I don't really see conflict per se. But that said, I came from a village called Beit Daras. It's a village in Palestine, 1948. Simple village, 2,000 people, which was considered a big village compared to the other surrounding villages in the southern Palestinian countryside. That village was affiliated with the massacre of Beit Daras, where Zionist gangs have killed a large number of Palestinians who were trying to escape during what we call the third and the main battle of Beit Daras, leading to the massacre of Beit Daras. Many of the descendants of these Badrasawis, meaning the people of Beit Daras, have also been exterminated or killed during the Gaza genocide, including many members of my family. I also have many members of my family who are either missing or dead or in Israeli prisons. I don't know. Nobody knows. We try to petition Israeli courts to find out. They are not telling us anything. Maybe we will find out once they are executed. I hope not. But the point is here that you have this continuous line of murder, mayhem, destruction, racism, apartheid, savagery. It's all in that. And it hasn't changed. It's not new. Once in a while you kind of hear a formerly pro-Israel intellectual saying, Israel is now becoming an extremist society. Really? What was it prior to October 7, 2023? Scandinavian democracy? So this kind of language, we really do need to orient the language in a proper way. We need to frame it in a proper way. And yes, we do need to understand things in a proper way. Now, that said, the justice is not going to come from Israel. Now, it doesn't mean that Israeli society does not have a work to do. It doesn't mean that people like Jeff and many people who have been advocating, coexistence and justice and respect for international law, reeling against their governments, all governments. It doesn't mean that they don't have a role to the country, but that's their job. That's their responsibility. It's not mine. Mine as a Palestinian, as an Arab, as a Muslim, as a Middle Eastern, as a human being, is to ensure that we never cease resisting and to explain why we resist and to ensure that whatever outcome that's happening from the current war and previous conflicts and future conflicts is going to create a greater unity among our people, among people throughout the region, and among anybody who wants to join this movement, be it Christian, Jewish, right-wing, left-wing. Honestly, it doesn't even matter anymore. We just need to create the momentum that will ultimately make the Israeli project, the Zionist project, indefensible And we see the numbers. I respect a lot of what our speaker said from London. I respect, and I'm very familiar with much of her work as well, Yvonne. But the thing is, I disagree with the pessimism, and I know this might sound a little bit odd coming from a Gazan who has lost more family numbers that I'm able to count, again, because many of them are still missing. But the optimism comes from here. We as intellectuals, as historians, as activists, if you will, I'm not crazy about the term, but let's just include it as well. We have always been fighting for something we call paradigm shift. We want to change the conversation on Palestine, and we need greater global sympathy with Palestine than with Israel. And once we do that, that's where change starts happening. That change has to be defined by the Palestinians as the primary victim of Zionism, but also with all of our allies, including those in Israel who are also fighting against the system. Now, the change is happening. It's everywhere. The fact that for the first time, when I came to this country, when I came to America, it has always been about 10, maximum 15% of people sympathized with Palestinians, and it's always been static. It's always that number. To look at the latest information coming from the Gallup poll, as of February of this year, that for the first time in history, you have more Americans sympathizing with Palestine than with Israel, despite of the mainstream media, the disinformation, the misinformation, the right-wing mania, the mega movements, Trump's racism, and all these things. And yet somehow we managed, with our limited resources, with our allies everywhere, on social media, independent media, radio stations like yours, and that we actually managed to create a shift in America, the heart of the problem of colonialism, and the biggest line of support for Israel's settler colonialism, then you can assume that this is happening everywhere around the world. Now, it's our responsibility to guide this movement or this movement. That's our responsibility as intellectuals, to educate, to inform, and to guide. But the momentum is there and the numbers are there. As a Palestinian, I take my cues, with all due respect to everybody else, from my people in Gaza. I take my cues from those who are resisting, in all forms of resistance, be it the fighter, be it the artist, being the ordinary man and the ordinary woman who are desperate to get to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque and they have been blocked for weeks, to the child in Gaza who is saying poetry at the site of a morgue where his entire family is being pushed together, before burial in a mass grave. These are the people who inspire me. And these are the voices that I try to convey. And my call to everyone else is just, there's no need for the echo chamber. Just listen to them. They are extremely articulated, extremely empowered, and they know precisely what they want.